Bhagat Singh, The Flame That Would Not Die. Part 1. Birth in the Shadow of Revolt. The year was 1907. The Punjab was restless, the air heavy with whispers of rebellion against the mighty British Empire. In the small village of Banga, nestled in the Lalpur district of undivided Punjab, a child was born who would one day set the soul of India ablaze. His name was Bhagat Singh. The date was 27 September, and destiny, it seemed, had already marked him for an extraordinary fate. His birth came at a charged moment in his family's life. His father, Kishan Singh Sandhu, and uncle, Ajit Singh, were themselves embroiled in the swirl of political agitation. Both men had been active in opposing the Canal Colonization Bill, a measure that angered farmers by seizing their lands and forcing new taxes upon them. Ajit Singh would later take part in the Ghadar movement of 1914–15, a global revolutionary campaign seeking to free India from British rule. Bhagat, the second of 7 children, thus entered a household where politics and protest were as natural as prayer. His mother, Vidyavati, carried the quiet strength of a woman whose husband and brothers-in-law were constantly on the edge of arrest, exile, or worse. Punjab itself was a cauldron of emotions, proud of its martial traditions, scarred by colonial exploitation, and haunted by memories of the failed uprisings of 1857. Young Bhagat's earliest lullabies were not mere folk songs but tales of heroism, of men who had faced the gallows rather than bend their heads before the foreign crown. From the moment he could walk, Bhagat's world was rich with both inspiration and danger. The village elders would sit cross-legged under banyan trees, telling stories of freedom fighters whose names the British would rather forget. Kishan Singh, though a farmer, was well versed in politics, and Ajit Singh's fiery speeches were legendary. The boy's earliest lessons were not only in the Sikh tradition of bravery, but also in the modern language of protest, resistance, and sacrifice. When he was still a small child, Bhagat witnessed a sight that left an indelible mark on his imagination. A plowed field where his father had sown not crops but blood-red flowers. These, his father said, are the seeds of revolution. They will grow in your heart, my son. His formal education began in the village school, where he was a quick learner. But the rhythms of rural life, though peaceful, could not contain the restless curiosity that stirred in him. His parents soon sent him to the Dayanand Anglo-Vedic school in Lahore, a city that would become the stage for much of his life's drama. This was no ordinary institution. It had been founded with a nationalist spirit, a counter to the British-controlled schools that taught loyalty to the empire. Here, young Bhagat was not only exposed to the Punjabi classics and the stories of the gurus, but also to the currents of modern political thought that were electrifying the subcontinent. In 1923, at the age of 16, Bhagat enrolled in the National College in Lahore. Founded by the venerable Lala Lajpat Rai, this institution was itself a product of resistance to British policies. It was created in the wake of Gandhi's non-cooperation movement, a call for Indians to boycott schools funded by the colonial government. Within these walls, Bhagat's intellect began to sharpen. He immersed himself in history, politics, and literature, both Indian and European. He read not just to pass exams, but to understand the forces that bound his country in chains. By then, his worldview was expanding beyond the borders of Punjab. The stories of Garibaldi, Mazzini, and Lenin stirred him. The writings of Karl Marx and Bakunin began to shape his understanding of oppression not as an accident of history, but as a system maintained by economic and political exploitation. His teachers soon realized that this was no ordinary student. In 1927, the colonial authorities arrested him for alleged involvement in a bombing incident in Lahore, though the charges were flimsy. The real reason many believed, was his growing influence on the city's youth. His release came after 5 weeks and a heavy surety of rupees 60, a staggering sum for the time. The arrest only deepened his resolve. Bhagat began contributing articles to Urdu and Punjabi newspapers, many of them fiercely critical of the British government. He joined the Naujawan Bharat Sabha, a youth organization that spread revolutionary ideas among workers and peasants. He also wrote for Kirti, the journal of the Kirti Kisan Party, adopting pseudonyms like Balwant, Ranjit, and Vidrohi, the rebel. Each passing day, the gap between Gandhian non-violence and Bhagat Singh's own vision of revolution widened. He respected Gandhi's moral courage but doubted the sufficiency of peaceful protest in the face of imperial brutality. His heart leaned toward a socialism rooted in the empowerment of workers and peasants, a liberation that would not just replace one set of rulers with another. The young man who had once plucked red flowers from his father's field was now preparing to sow far more dangerous seeds. In the teeming streets of Lahore, in the printing presses of Amritsar, and in the dimly lit rooms where revolutionaries gathered, his name was beginning to circulate not as a student or writer, but as a man of action. History was about to quicken its pace. The death of Lala Lajpat Rai in 1928, following a brutal police assault, would ignite in Bhagat Singh a fire that would burn until his final breath. He was no longer just the son of Kishan Singh. He was becoming the face of a new India, defiant, unafraid, and ready to stake everything for freedom. Part 2. Blood for Blood. The winter of 1928 settled heavily over Lahore, but there was no chill greater than the one gripping the hearts of its patriots. On 30 October, the Simon Commission, a body sent from Britain to discuss constitutional reforms for India, arrived in the city. Not a single Indian sat on that commission. To men like Lala Lajpat Rai, the Lion of Punjab, this was not just an insult. It was a direct affirmation of the empire's arrogance. The protest against the commission was meant to be peaceful. Crowds filled the streets, their voices rising in slogans that defied the colonial order. At their head stood Rai, proud and unbending, leading a march as though carrying the spirit of Punjab itself. But the police, commanded by Superintendent James A. Scott, had other plans. His order was short, cruel, and sharp. Lathi charge. The batons came down like monsoon hail. They struck not only flesh and bone, but the dignity of a people. Rai himself was singled out blow after blow, raining on his head and chest. The crowd screamed, but the police did not relent until their leader staggered away, his face pale yet unbroken. He died 17 days later. The official cause, a heart attack. But in the hearts of his followers, there was no doubt the Lathis had killed him, and Scott's name was written in blood. Bhagat Singh, now a rising figure in the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, HSRA, felt the loss like a personal wound. Rai had been his inspiration, the man who built the very college where Bhagat had studied. He vowed that the insult would not go unanswered. The blow to Lala Lajpat Rai, he told his comrades, is a blow to the nation. It must be avenged. The HSRA conspired to strike back, not in the shadows, but with an act so bold that it would roar across the empire. The plan was simple in its fury. Kill James A. Scott. Singh, Shivaram Rajguru, Sukhdev Thapar, and Chandrasekhar Azad began their preparations. But fate can be as cruel as any tyrant. On 17 December 1928, the trap was set outside the district police headquarters in Lahore. The air was tense. Bhagat stood ready, a revolver hidden beneath his coat. Rajguru, a trained marksman, waited with his own weapon. And then through the station gates emerged not Scott but John P. Saunders, a 21-year-old assistant superintendent of police. He was young, newly posted, and riding a motorcycle. In the deadly seconds that followed, identity mattered less than the intent that had brought the revolutionaries there. Rajguru fired the first shot. Saunders staggered, fell, the roar of his engine dying into silence. Singh stepped forward, delivering several close-range shots. The postmortem would later reveal 8 bullet wounds, each one a punctuation mark and a message to the empire. As the sound of gunfire echoed, chaos erupted. Head Constable Chanan Singh, stationed nearby, gave chase. But Chandrasekhar Azad, cool under fire, raised his revolver. A single shot ended the constable's pursuit forever. The streets were already thick with panic as the revolutionaries fled, blending into the life of the city. They darted through the gates of DAV College, crossed the road, and vanished into safe houses known only to their circle. The British response was swift and merciless. Roadblocks sprang up, railway stations were watched, and the Criminal Investigation Department prowled the city like wolves. In the days that followed, the HSRA printed and pasted posters across Lahore. They claimed responsibility not for Saunders' death, exactly, but for avenging Lala Lajpat Rai. In those leaflets, they crossed out James Scott and replaced it with John Saunders. It was an admission wrapped in defiance. For months, Bhagat Singh lived as a man without a name. He wore disguises, adopted pseudonyms, and kept moving from one safe haven to another. The city whispered his name in both awe and fear. To the colonial police, he was a fugitive whose capture was only a matter of time. To the people, he was the avenger of Punjab, the young lion who dared to strike the empire. Yet, within the HSRA, the mood was not triumph alone. Many knew the killing of Saunders was a mistaken target, and that the backlash could crush their fragile network. Public opinion was divided. Mahatma Gandhi condemned the act as a retrograde step, fearing it would undermine the broader non-violent struggle. But Jawaharlal Nehru, though not endorsing violence, understood the emotional current sweeping through the Punjab. Bhagat Singh did not become popular because of his act of terrorism, Nehru would later write. He became a symbol. Each town and village resounded with his name. Meanwhile, the man himself was already thinking beyond this single act. To him, the death of Saunders was not enough. It was only a prelude. He wanted the HSRA's cause to resonate across the nation, to awaken the masses not just to outrage but to the idea of revolution. He believed in something deeper than vengeance, the transformation of society itself. But vengeance had already set its hooks into destiny. The killing of Saunders had placed Bhagat Singh on an irreversible path. Every road now led toward confrontation with the British state. The stakes were no longer arrest or exile, they were life and death. And Bhagat Singh, just 21 years old, seemed ready to gamble it all. Soon, he would trade the revolver for something even more powerful, the stage of a public trial. But before that, there was another act to play out, a daring explosion in the heart of British legislative power. It would not kill, but it would make the empire tremble. Part 3. The Echo in the Assembly Hall. By the spring of 1929, Bhagat Singh had been a ghost in the eyes of the British police for months, vanishing into crowded bazaars, slipping through safe houses, shedding identities like worn coats. But the Saunders shooting, however electrifying to his comrades, had left him restless. The act had been personal, visceral, yet too easily dismissed by the empire as the deed of a handful of misguided youths. He wanted something more, something that would strike not at a man, but at the very arrogance of British rule. Something that would be remembered not for blood spilled, but for an idea shouted so loud it could never be silenced. The opportunity came in the form of 2 pieces of legislation, the Public Safety Bill and the Trade Disputes Act. Both had been rejected by the Central Legislative Assembly, but the Viceroy, wielding his special powers, was forcing them into law regardless. To Bhagat Singh, this was the empire's hypocrisy laid bare parliamentary theater masking the iron fist of dictatorship. In the cramped rooms of the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, HSRA, the plan took shape. Inspired by the French anarchist Auguste Vaillant, who in 1893 had hurled a bomb into the French Chamber of Deputies, Singh proposed an act of symbolic defiance. Explode low-intensity bombs in the assembly itself, ensuring no deaths, then allow themselves to be arrested. Not all in the HSRA approved. The leadership feared that Singh's involvement would seal his fate. The Saunders case still shadowed him, but Bhagat was unyielding. He saw the trial that would follow as the true battleground, a stage to speak directly to the nation and the world. On the morning of 8 April 1929, the Central Legislative Assembly in Delhi buzzed with the usual colonial rituals, British and Indian legislators murmuring over papers, the drone of debate filling the high-ceilinged chamber. From the public gallery above, two young men sat quietly, Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt. Each carried a crude bomb, wrapped and hidden, each knowing that by nightfall they would be in chains. The moment came like the snap of a bowstring. Singh and Dutt rose, arms sweeping forward, and the bombs arced into the well of the assembly. The explosion was loud, the smoke curling upward like a storm cloud, the sound echoing off the marble walls. Legislators scrambled for cover. A few, including finance member George Ernest Schuster, were slightly injured. But the bombs had been designed not to kill. This was no act of slaughter, it was theater, as deliberate as any scripted drama. From the gallery, the two men shouted, their voices cutting through the panic. "Inquilab Zindabad, long live the revolution." Then, as leaflets fluttered down like rebellious snowflakes, they stood waiting. There was no attempt to flee. When the police arrived, Singh calmly handed over his pistol. The leaflets declared their purpose. "We hold human life sacred." This was to make the deaf hear. In the hours that followed, Delhi buzzed with the news. The British papers called it an outrage. The Indian-owned press, while divided, could not ignore the audacity. The arrest of Bhagat Singh, long hunted for the Saunders killing, was front-page news. For Singh himself, the real work was only beginning. He referred to the coming trial as a drama. And he meant it. Every hearing would be a platform, every statement a challenge to the empire. He defended himself with a clarity that startled even seasoned lawyers. He spoke of the violence of colonial rule, the futility of petitions, and the right of the oppressed to resist. In June 1929, the verdict came. Life imprisonment for causing explosions of a nature likely to endanger life. Dutt was defended by Asaf Ali, but Singh stood alone, cross-examining witnesses with the poise of a man who already knew that the gallows might be his final audience. But the British had made a fatal mistake. Arresting Bhagat Singh did not silence him, it amplified him. In prison, he saw with his own eyes the difference in treatment between European and Indian inmates. While British prisoners were given better food, bedding, and sanitary conditions, Indian prisoners, even political ones, were treated as common criminals. To Singh, this was another front in the war for dignity, and so began the hunger strike. It was a weapon more dangerous than any revolver, slow, deliberate, impossible for the authorities to control without risking public outrage. Alongside fellow prisoner Jatin Das, Singh demanded equality for Indian political prisoners. The same food standards, access to books and newspapers, exemption from degrading manual labor. The days turned into weeks. The newspapers tracked every detail. The Tribune in Lahore carried reports of rallies in support of the strikers. Amritsar's streets filled with protesters. The British government, unnerved, imposed Section 144 to limit public gatherings. But the sympathy for Singh only grew. On 13 September 1929, Jatin Das died after 63 days without food. His body was carried through the streets of Lahore in a procession that stretched for miles. Leaders across the political spectrum, Jawaharlal Nehru, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Socialists, even moderates paid tribute. Singh ended his own strike after 116 days, at the urging of his father and the Congress leadership, but the message had been sent. His struggle was no longer about one man's vengeance. It was about the dignity of a people under foreign rule. Yet the British were not finished with him. The investigation into the Saunders murder was gathering speed, and the net was tightening. Soon, Bhagat Singh would be pulled from the relative safety of a life sentence into a trial where the only possible sentences were acquittal or death. The assembly bombing had made him a household name. The next trial would make him a martyr or a ghost. And Singh, who had once spoken of planting the seeds of revolution, was about to find out what it meant to water them with his own life. Part 4. Hunger, Chains, and the Courtroom Battlefield. The echo of the assembly bombing still lingered in the minds of the people, but in the stone corridors of British power, another storm was brewing. The colonial government had been patient, waiting, watching, building its case. Now, with a sweep of arrests and a net woven from informants' betrayals, it moved to pull Bhagat Singh into the trial that would decide his fate, the Lahore conspiracy case. In April 1929, the HSRA's bomb factory in Lahore was discovered. Weeks later, another in Saharanpur fell to police raids. Some revolutionaries held their silence under torture, others broke. Under the weight of confessions most damningly from former comrades, Hans Raj Vora and Jai Gopal, the British tied together three strands: the Saunders murder, the assembly bombing, and the illegal manufacture of arms. Singh, Rajguru, Sukhdev, and others were charged not only with killing Saunders and head constable Chanan Singh, but with waging war against the king. By the time he was rearrested for the Saunders case, Bhagat Singh had already transformed imprisonment into a political weapon. The hunger strike he had begun over prison conditions had become a nationwide rallying cry. In the Mianwali jail, he and his fellow strikers endured a brutality meant to break them taunts, isolation, the slow torture of placing food in their cells to tempt them into surrender. The authorities even filled their water pitchers with milk, forcing them to choose between thirst and breaking their vow. None faltered. When the government attempted force-feeding, Singh resisted violently, risking death. The hunger strike was no mere protest. It was a war of nerves, and for a time, Singh was winning. Section 144 was enforced in Lahore and Amritsar to control swelling crowds, but rallies spread like wildfire. In the Punjab Legislative Council, members resigned in protest over the prisoners' treatment. In the Central Assembly, Muhammad Ali Jinnah spoke in their defense, calling the strikers men with souls, who believed utterly in the justice of their cause. Then came the breaking point. Jatin Das, Singh's comrade in the strike, grew weak, his body wasting away day by day. Appeals for his release on health grounds were rejected. On the 63rd day, he died. The streets of Lahore erupted in grief and fury. Das's funeral procession stretched for miles, his coffin draped in the tricolor, carried shoulder high by thousands. Even moderates wept openly, and newspapers that had once distanced themselves from violence now mourned the man who had died for the dignity of Indian political prisoners. Singh, weakened but alive, ended his strike after 116 days, bowing to the pleas of his father and leaders of the Congress Party. But the moral victory was his. His name now belonged to the masses, a symbol of courage and sacrifice. It was into this atmosphere that the Lahore conspiracy case opened on 10 July 1929. Singh, still gaunt from starvation, was carried into court on a stretcher, shackled, but with his head high. He refused to bow before the judge, declaring himself a political prisoner, a combatant in a war, not a criminal. From the outset, the trial was not a trial, it was a duel. Singh and the other accused used the courtroom to proclaim their cause, to denounce imperialism, to remind the people outside that their fight was for all of India. The British, frustrated by the slow proceedings, abandoned the pretense of normal justice. On 1 May 1930, the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, declared an emergency and created a special tribunal of 3 High Court judges. This tribunal had extraordinary powers. Its verdict could not be appealed in any Indian court. Only the Privy Council in London could hear a challenge. It was justice, stripped of its safeguards, law bent to ensure conviction. The defense filed a habeas corpus petition arguing that such a tribunal was illegal, a violation of the Defence of India Act. The judges dismissed it. The machinery of the empire would grind forward, uninterrupted. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere often turned violent. When Prem Dutt, the youngest accused, hurled his slipper at an approver who had turned witness for the prosecution, the magistrate ordered all the accused to be handcuffed during trial. Singh and his comrades refused, and in response, they were beaten so savagely that several could not stand. On some days, they refused to appear in court at all. Singh wrote letters to the magistrate explaining their boycott, denouncing the trial as a sham. With their absence, the British hoped to silence them, but they had already planted their words in the press and in the hearts of the people. As the trial dragged on, the prosecution relied heavily on the testimony of those who had betrayed the HSRA. Singh did not waste time denying the facts. Instead, he reframed them. Yes, they had acted, but their actions were those of revolutionaries, resisting tyranny, not criminals seeking personal gain. By the end of September 1930, the verdict was inevitable. On 7 October, the tribunal pronounced Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, and Rajguru guilty of murder and sentenced them to death by hanging. The other accused received sentences ranging from transportation for life to acquittal. Outside the court, the reaction was immediate. Crowds gathered, protests flared, and appeals for clemency began to circulate. But inside his cell, Singh was calm. Death was no stranger to him now. He had lived with it since the day he picked up a revolver. In his mind, the trial had already served its purpose. He had turned the courtroom into a battlefield. And in that battle, he had not been defeated. For the British, the trial was meant to be the empire's assertion of order over chaos. For India, it had been the trial of the empire itself, and in the eyes of the people, the empire had lost. The noose was now waiting. But Bhagat Singh was not yet finished. He still had letters to write, ideas to share, and a final stand to make, not in defiance of death, but in service of something he believed would outlive him. The clock was ticking toward March 1931. Part 5. The Road to the Gallows. The Special Tribunal's judgment of 7 October 1930 fell like a hammer blow. Death by hanging for Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, and Sukhdev. Outside the court, the cry of protest rose instantly across Punjab, across India. For the people, the trial had never been about guilt or innocence. It had been about the right to resist oppression. Now, the empire had marked its most defiant sons for death. The machinery of appeal began to grind, but Bhagat Singh himself was ambivalent. He had lived with the possibility of death since the day he entered the HSRA. To him, the gallows was not a tragedy, but a final act in the theater of revolution. A revolutionary, he once said, should face death as a soldier faces the battlefield. Yet his comrades and political allies were not ready to let the empire take him without a fight. In Punjab, a defense committee was formed to appeal to the Privy Council in London, the last and highest authority under British law. The lawyers argued that the very creation of the special tribunal had been unlawful. The Defence of India Act, they claimed, allowed such extraordinary measures only during a breakdown of law and order. No such collapse had occurred. The tribunal, they said, was an illegal shortcut to the gallows. The British countered with cold logic. The Viceroy had the power to act as he had, and in any case, the verdict stood. When the Privy Council's decision came, it was like ice water poured over Hope appeal dismissed. But the campaign for mercy was not over. On 14 February 1931, Congress President Madan Mohan Malaviya filed a petition with the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, to commute the death sentences. Others, including several prisoners, sent letters to Mahatma Gandhi urging him to intervene directly. Gandhi did meet with Irwin. In his notes, dated 19 March, the Viceroy recorded the conversation. Gandhi told him the scheduled execution set for 24 March would cast a dark shadow over the Congress session in Karachi. He urged commutation. Irwin listened, even admitted the case was weighty, but in the end remained unmoved. The communists in Britain issued their own denunciation, calling the case an example of the empire's callousness and cruelty, a calculated act meant to instill fear among the colonized. Meanwhile, among Singh's comrades, desperation was rising. There were whispers of a daring rescue. HSRA member Bhagwati Charan Vora worked feverishly to prepare bombs for an assault on the jail. But fate was merciless. The bombs exploded prematurely, killing Vora and ending the plan. Inside Lahore jail, Bhagat Singh's days were measured not in minutes, but in purpose. He read voraciously, studied Marx and Lenin, and wrote essays, letters, and statements for publication. He refused to make any plea for his own life, even when friends arrived with drafts of mercy petitions. To one such friend, Pranath Mehta, he said, "I have been arrested while waging a war. For me, there can be no gallows. Put me into the mouth of a cannon and blow me off." If the British expected him to flinch in the face of death, they misunderstood him completely. His calmness was unnerving, even to the jailers. He treated the gallows not as an enemy, but as an ally in the cause he served. The execution date was set for 24 March 1931, but the colonial authorities, perhaps fearing a massive public demonstration, moved it forward by 11 hours. On the evening of 23 March, at 7:30 p.m., the three young men were led from their cells to the hanging yard. It is said they walked in step, heads high, singing Sarfaroshi Ki Tamana, the anthem of defiance. By law, a magistrate had to be present, but none would volunteer. An honorary judge, Nawab Muhammad Ahmed Khan Kasuri, was brought in to witness the act and sign the warrants. After the hangings, there was no funeral procession, no return of the bodies to their families. Instead, in the cover of darkness, the bodies were cut down, chopped into pieces, stuffed into sacks, and smuggled out of the jail. At a spot near the village of Jallianwala, the remains were hastily burned. The ashes were scattered into the Sutlej River under guard, 10 kilometers from Firozpur. When the news broke the next morning, outrage exploded across India. The Karachi Congress session opened with an official resolution mourning their deaths, calling the executions an act of wanton vengeance and a betrayal of the people's unanimous demand for commutation. Even while condemning political violence, the Congress praised their courage and sacrifice. In Young India, on 29 March, Gandhi wrote words that revealed both his respect and his ideological distance. Bhagat Singh did not wish to live. He refused to apologize or even file an appeal. These heroes had conquered the fear of death. Let us bow to them 1,000 times for their heroism, but we should not imitate their act. In other cities, hurdles and strikes shut down businesses. In Kanpur, British officials called it a reign of terror. The New York Times reported riots, attacks on police, and an assault on Gandhi himself by an angry youth in Karachi. But in the lanes of Punjab, and in the fields where peasants bent over the soil, there was another kind of silence, the silence of grief that is also pride. Mothers told their children the names of Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, and Sukhdev as if reciting sacred mantras. Songs rose in their memory, carrying their names into every corner of the north. The empire had taken their lives, but it had failed in the one thing it sought most to kill their ideas. For Bhagat Singh had always known that his death was not an end, but a beginning. In his own words, "It is easy to kill individuals, but you cannot kill the ideas." Great empires crumbled, while the ideas survived. The gallows had made him immortal. Part 6. The Creed of a Revolutionary. To understand Bhagat Singh, one cannot stop at the image of the young man walking to the gallows. His legacy was not merely the bravery with which he met death, but the fierce clarity with which he had chosen to live. In the years between boyhood and the noose, he had built for himself a creed, a political and philosophical compass that guided every step he took. The roots of that creed ran deep in the soil of Punjab's radical tradition, but they were watered by ideas from far beyond India's borders. In his teenage years, Singh had revered men like Kartar Singh Saraba, a Ghadar Party revolutionary hanged at the age of 19, and Bhai Parmanand, another Ghadar stalwart. From them he inherited the conviction that freedom could not be begged for, it had to be seized, even at the cost of life itself. But as he grew, his worldview expanded into the realm of political theory. He devoured books by Mikhail Bakunin, Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, and Leon Trotsky. His prison notebooks were filled with quotations, reflections, and arguments with himself. He saw capitalism and imperialism as two heads of the same beast, both feeding on the labor and misery of the masses. The only cure, he believed, was a socialism rooted in the people, not in the ambitions of a new ruling elite. In a statement he wrote for young political workers, Singh declared that the true revolutionary's goal was social reconstruction on new, i.e., Marxist basis. This was not the language of mere nationalist pride, it was a blueprint for dismantling every form of exploitation. To him, independence meant little if it only replaced British rulers with Indian landlords and capitalists. This conviction set him apart from many in the freedom movement, especially those inspired by Gandhi. Singh respected Gandhi's moral courage, but he rejected the idea that nonviolence could, by itself, uproot the entrenched systems of oppression. In his eyes, political freedom without social and economic justice would only be half a revolution. In 1928, he published a series of articles on anarchism in the journal Kirti. He knew the term frightened people, so he sought to reclaim it, explaining that anarchism did not mean chaos, but the absence of rulers and the abolition of exploitation. The ultimate goal of anarchism, he wrote, is complete independence. There will be no chains on the body or control by the state. And yet, even in his call for the destruction of oppressive systems, there was a humanism at the core of his thought. He saw revolution not as an end in itself, but as a path to a society where no one would be crazy for money or obsessed with God or religion, where equality was not just written in law but lived in daily life. On 21 January 1930, during a hearing in the Lahore conspiracy case, Singh and his comrades entered the courtroom wearing red scarves. They raised slogans. Long live Socialist Revolution. Down with imperialism. Lenin's name will never die. Singh then read aloud a telegram addressed to the Third International in Moscow, praising the Soviet experiment and pledging solidarity with the international working-class movement. In this way, he made clear that his struggle was not just India's, it was part of a global fight against oppression. But perhaps the most personal and most misunderstood element of his creed was his atheism. It had not always been so. As a boy, he had followed Sikh traditions and rituals. But the communal riots that followed the collapse of Gandhi's non-cooperation movement shook him deeply. He could not understand how Hindus and Muslims, who had marched side by side against British rule, could turn on each other in the name of religion. This disillusionment drove him to study the works of atheist thinkers like Bakunin and Lenin. In prison, when fellow inmate Randhir Singh accused him of being blinded by ego and fame, Singh responded with one of his most enduring writings, "Why, I am an atheist." In it, he argued that God was a creation of human imagination, born of fear and helplessness. He saw reliance on divine will as a form of surrender, a way to avoid the responsibility of changing the world. "I consider it to be an act of degradation and demoralization," he wrote, "to pray at the last moment for such petty, selfish motives." For him, courage lay in facing death with open eyes, without the comfort of a higher power's promise. These were not the words of a man chasing martyrdom for its own sake. They were the reflections of someone who saw himself as part of a continuum of struggle, one fighter in a battle that would go on long after his body was gone. Even the act of dying, he believed, had meaning only if it served to awaken others. This is why he and his comrades had asked the British to execute them not by hanging, but by firing squad, as soldiers are killed in war. They wanted the world to see them not as criminals, but as warriors. The request was denied. When visitors came to his cell in his final days, they found him absorbed in Clara Zetkin's reminiscences of Lenin. Asked what his last wish was, Singh replied simply, "To finish reading the book." He had once written in a leaflet thrown into the assembly, "It is easy to kill individuals, but you cannot kill the ideas. Great empires crumbled while the ideas survived." This was his true creed, that ideas were immortal, and that a revolutionary's task was to live, fight, and, if need be, die in service of them. And so, by the time the gallows waited for him, Bhagat Singh had already won the only victory that mattered to him, the making of an idea so strong, so deeply sown in the hearts of the people, that no empire could ever uproot it. Part 7. The Birth of a Legend. The night of 23 March 1931 had passed under a shroud of secrecy in Lahore jail, but the morning brought with it a tremor that would ripple across the subcontinent. News spread fast. Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, and Sukhdev had been hanged ahead of schedule, their bodies disposed of in darkness. There had been no public procession, no return of remains to grieving families. The British had hoped to contain the storm by killing the lightning. Instead, they had unleashed it. By dawn, the streets of Lahore were thick with rumors. In tea shops, bazaars, and gurdwaras, the same questions were whispered with clenched jaws. Why the hurry? Why the secrecy? In Punjab's villages, mothers wept as if their own sons had been taken. Children repeated the names Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, Sukhdev, as if learning them by heart were a form of resistance. The Congress session in Karachi opened in an atmosphere heavy with grief and defiance. In its official resolution, the party condemned the hangings as an act of wanton vengeance and a betrayal of the nation's demand for commutation. Even leaders who had never endorsed violence spoke in admiration of the young men's courage. Mahatma Gandhi, in young India on 29 March, wrote words that revealed both the depth of his respect and his ideological caution. Bhagat Singh did not wish to live. He refused to apologize, or even file an appeal. These heroes had conquered the fear of death. Let us bow to them 1,000 times for their heroism. But we should not imitate their act. Outside the halls of leadership, the people were less restrained. Hardals shut down shops and factories from Amritsar to Calcutta. In Kanpur, British officials described a reign of terror. In Karachi, an enraged youth attacked Gandhi with a stick, accusing him of failing to save Singh. The New York Times reported that India's extremists were answering the hangings with riots and strikes. Yet the public anger was more than just mourning, it was the transformation of a man into a symbol. Bhagat Singh had been a revolutionary before, but in death he became a legend, his image burnished by both his courage and the youth of his sacrifice. The photograph of him in a felt hat, mustache neatly groomed, stared from posters, pamphlets, and matchbox covers. In Punjab, his portraits sometimes hung beside those of the gurus in Sikh homes, in others, beside Gandhi and Nehru. Folk songs sprang up almost overnight. "O mother, dye my robe in the color of spring. Sarfaroshi ki tamanna ab hamare dil mein hai." They were sung in the fields, in marketplaces, at wedding processions, weaving his memory into the daily life of the people. Even the British intelligence officers, who had spent years hunting him, admitted his posthumous reach was extraordinary. Horace Williamson, director of the Intelligence Bureau, would later write that his photograph rivaled in popularity even that of Mr. Gandhi himself. The breadth of his appeal puzzled many. Communists admired his socialism. Hindu nationalists claimed him as a proud son of Bharat Mata. Sikh leaders honored him as a martyr to Punjab's honor. Congress supporters hailed his patriotism. Yet each group also struggled with parts of his ideology. His atheism was a thorn for religious nationalists. His embrace of violence troubled the Gandhian camp, and his later critique of individual terrorism made some revolutionaries uncomfortable. But these contradictions only added to his mystique. He was too large to be neatly claimed by any one ideology. In death, he belonged to everyone and to no one. For the British, this was a dangerous development. Martyrs are harder to suppress than living rebels. Executions are meant to deter. In Bhagat Singh's case, it had the opposite effect. His story became a rallying cry, not just in Punjab but in Bengal, Maharashtra, and the United Provinces. His name appeared in graffiti on walls, in petitions, in student protests. In Lahore, Shadman Chowk, the square near the site of his hanging, became an unmarked shrine. People came quietly, leaving flowers, whispering prayers despite knowing it could draw police attention. In the decades to come, activists in Pakistan would fight to officially name the spot Bhagat Singh Chowk, a battle that continued long after the partition of India. The legend also began to travel beyond India. Socialist groups in Britain and Europe celebrated him as a comrade in arms against imperialism. In Moscow, newspapers described his trial and execution as proof of the British Empire's cruelty. For young anti-colonial activists across Asia and Africa, Bhagat Singh became proof that resistance was not only possible but glorious. His family, meanwhile, bore the strange weight of both loss and public adoration. His mother, Vidyavati, received mourners for years in their ancestral village, Katkar Kalan. She spoke of him not with tears alone, but with the pride of one who knew her son's death had been his choice. The British could control many things, newspapers, courts, prisons, but they could not control the way his memory lived in the hearts of the people. In dying young, Bhagat Singh had done what few revolutionaries manage. He had made himself immortal in the very moment the rope tightened around his neck. But the making of a legend is never a still thing. In the years to come, Politicians, parties, and movements would all try to claim him, shaping his memory to fit their own needs. Some would lift his name like a banner, others would sand down the sharper edges of his thought. Yet the real Bhagat Singh, the one who read Marx in his cell, who wrote of atheism and socialism, who believed revolution was as much about ideas as about action, still lived on in his own words, waiting for each new generation to find him again. Part 8. The Afterlife of a Martyr. The years after 1931 did not bury Bhagat Singh, they resurrected him. His execution had been meant as a warning to India's revolutionaries, but instead it lit a flame that spread far beyond Lahore jail's walls. Even as the nation stumbled through the 1930s, navigating the shifting tides of politics and the looming shadow of World War II, his face and his words refused to fade. In Punjab, his story was carried by the oral tradition folk ballads, sung in fields and wedding processions, verses that mingled grief with pride. The Shahidi Mela, or Martyrdom Fair, became an annual act of remembrance every 23 March. People traveled from villages across the state to gather near the Sutlej River, paying homage at the site where his ashes had been scattered under cover of night. It was both a celebration and a protest, a way to tell the British, and later the world, that they had not succeeded in erasing him. After partition in 1947, the story of Bhagat Singh found itself split by a new border. The village of Banga, where he was born, and the site of his execution, Lahore, became part of Pakistan. The place of his cremation at Hussainiwala fell to Pakistan too, until a land swap in 1961 returned it to India. On that soil, the National Martyrs Memorial was built, honoring Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, and Sukhdev. Their statues stood in defiance, though during the 1971 India-Pakistan War, they were removed by the Pakistani army and never returned. By 1973, the memorial was rebuilt, its loss only deepening the sense of reverence around it. In Khatkar Kalan, his ancestral village, a museum was established on the 50th anniversary of his death. Behind its quiet walls lay a treasure of memory. The ashes from his cremation still wrapped in the blood-stained newspaper, sand soaked with his blood, a page from the judgment sentencing Kartar Singh Saraba to death, on which Bhagat had scrawled notes, his copy of the Bhagavad Gita, signed during his days in Lahore jail, and other possessions that spoke more eloquently than any speech. The memorial in Khatkar Kalan grew over the years. In 2009, a sprawling complex was inaugurated, costing $168 million, with galleries narrating his life from childhood to martyrdom. Visitors walked through it not like tourists, but like pilgrims. In Delhi, his presence found a place in the very heart of Indian democracy. On 15 August 2008, an 18-foot bronze statue of Bhagat Singh was unveiled in the Parliament of India, placed beside the statues of Indira Gandhi and Subhas Chandra Bose. His portrait, along with that of Batukeshwar Dutt, adorned the walls of the Parliament House, silent witnesses to the debates and laws of the free nation for which he had died. Even the Supreme Court of India paid tribute, opening a museum on legal history whose first exhibition was devoted to his trial. There, visitors could walk through the records of the Lahore conspiracy case, reading the words that had echoed in the courtroom before the noose claimed him. Across the border in Pakistan, his memory had a more complicated journey. For decades, official history books downplayed his role, viewing him through the lens of the partition's religious and political divides. Yet, the people of Lahore remembered. Activists formed the Bhagat Singh Memorial Foundation, campaigning to rename Shadman Chowk, the square near his execution site, as Bhagat Singh Chowk. Legal challenges and political resistance slowed the effort, but the idea refused to die. On anniversaries of his death, Flowers still appeared there, placed by quiet hands. In popular culture, Bhagat Singh's afterlife became almost as rich as his real one. Films retold his story again and again. From Shaheed, Azad Bhagat Singh, 1954, to Manoj Kumar's Shaheed, 1965, to the remarkable year 2002, when three different films, The Legend of Bhagat Singh, 23rd March 1931, Shaheed, and Shaheed-e-Azam were released within months of each other. Each actor, Ajay Devgan, Bobby Deol, Sonu Sood, wore his hat and mustache as though donning armor. Television and theater followed suit. Plays about his life drew packed crowds in both India and Pakistan, the audience often joining in the singing of Mera Rang de Basanti Chola, as if it were a shared prayer. Documentaries like Inquilab, directed by Gauhar Raza, sought to strip away the romanticized myths and return to the man who had been both thinker and fighter. His songs, though not written by him, became part of his legend. Sarfaroshi Ki Tamana and Mera Rang de Basanti Chola were woven into film soundtracks, stage performances, and even political rallies. They carried the texture of his era, but spoke to new generations, their lyrics urging sacrifice, their melodies a call to arms. The Indian state, too, marked his memory. A commemorative stamp was issued in 1968 on his 61st birth anniversary. A 5/5 coin bearing his image was released in 2012. On 23 March each year, the Parliament observed a moment of silence in his honor. Yet his memory was never owned entirely by the state. Students painted his name on protest banners during the emergency of the 1970s. Farmers carried his portrait in rallies against unjust laws. Activists invoked him when demanding justice for the poor, the oppressed, and the voiceless. The irony was clear. Bhagat Singh, who had been wary of any single ideology claiming his life, now belonged to all who resisted. Gandhians who opposed violence still admired his courage. Leftists embraced his socialism. Sikh and Hindu nationalists, despite his atheism, honored his martyrdom. The Naxalite left saw in him a comrade. Mainstream politicians saw in him a national hero. Perhaps this was the truest proof of his immortality, not that he was remembered exactly as he had been, but that every generation found in him what it most needed: courage, defiance, sacrifice, and the refusal to bow. Still, somewhere in the archives, in the fragile pages of his prison writings, the real Bhagat Singh waits sharp, thoughtful, uncompromising. A man who knew that his death would make him a legend, but who also hoped his words might outlive even the legend itself. Part 9. The Eternal Challenge. Bhagat Singh's life ended in the span of 23 years, but his story has refused to end for nearly a century. Each retelling, whether in song, cinema, speech, or whispered family memory, brings him alive again, not as a relic of history, but as a mirror in which India must see itself. And what the mirror shows is never simple. For some, he is the young man in a felt hat, head cocked slightly, eyes fierce and unyielding, the perfect icon of defiance. For others, he is the writer in a dim prison cell, scribbling essays on socialism and atheism, wrestling with ideas as dangerous to the comfortable as any pistol or bomb. To still others, he is the martyr whose final walk to the gallows was taken without a tremor, whose name was sung in 1,000 throats before the ropes had even cooled. Yet his true power lies in the fact that he cannot be reduced to any one of these images. Bhagat Singh was not simply a romantic rebel. He was a disciplined thinker who measured his life against the needs of a greater struggle. His revolution was not for spectacle, it was for transformation. In his own time, He was a challenge to every political camp. To the Gandhians, he was proof that there were Indians willing to meet British brutality with equal force, though he rejected violence as an end in itself. To the Socialists, he was a pioneer who linked India's freedom to the liberation of the working class, but he refused to let revolution stagnate in dogma. To religious nationalists, he was a hero whose atheism they preferred to ignore. To all of them, he was a reminder that the struggle for freedom was bigger than any single ideology. That is why, even today, his name surfaces whenever India faces questions about justice, inequality, and the meaning of freedom. In protest against corruption, his face appears on placards. In farmers' marches, his songs are sung. In student movements, his speeches are quoted as rallying cries. Each time the state grows deaf to dissent, someone inevitably invokes the man who once threw harmless bombs into a colonial assembly to make the deaf hear. His ideas, however, remain the sharper inheritance. In Why I Am an Atheist, he wrote of the courage it takes to face life and death without illusions. In his political writings, he insisted that independence without social and economic justice would be hollow. In his leaflets and court statements, he reminded the world that oppression is a system, not just a set of rulers. These words continue to echo because the questions he raised remain unanswered. The paradox of Bhagat Singh's afterlife is that his image has often been celebrated more than his ideology. It is easy to revere the martyr, to wear his face on a t-shirt, to name a road or a park after him. It is harder to live by the principles he held, harder still to confront the uncomfortable truths they demand. To honor him fully is to ask whether India today lives up to the vision for which he gave his life. He dreamt of a country where no one would be exploited by wealth or power, where religion would be a matter of personal faith and not a weapon, where freedom would belong to the farmer in the field as much as to the politician in parliament. That dream, though etched in the 1920s, remains as urgent in the 21st century as it was in his own. And so, every March 23rd, as the Shahidi Mela fills the air at Hussainiwala with songs, slogans, and the smell of flowers, it is not just a tribute to a man long gone, it is a test. The young men and women who come there do not merely mourn Bhagat Singh, they inherit him. Whether they know it or not, they are being handed the challenge he left behind. What will you do with your freedom? What will you give to make it real? In the end, perhaps this is why Bhagat Singh has never grown old. He died young, but his questions age with each generation, becoming sharper as time passes. His smile in the photographs is both an invitation and a provocation, as if to say, I gave my life for an idea, will you give your life to live it? Empires crumble, flags change, governments rise and fall, but in the villages of Punjab, in the crowded streets of Delhi, in the campuses and courts and fields of India, the name Bhagat Singh still has the power to quicken the blood. He is not just remembered, he is awaited. Each time courage is needed. For that is the nature of some lives. They are not bound by the years they were lived in. They become a call, forever sounding, daring those who hear it to answer. And so the flame that was lit in Banga on 27 September 1907 and seemed to go out on 23 March 1931 still burns unclaimed by any one party, undimmed by time, untamed by history. It burns in the idea that freedom is worth not only dying for, but living for. It burns in the stubborn refusal to accept injustice as fate. It burns in the promise that Bhagat Singh himself made with his life, that while men can be killed, their ideas cannot.